For me, my employees work with me. I mean, I'm a worker myself, so you just don't behave like you're above somebody. You stay humble. Humbleness is a key thing.
We are not tapping into a beautiful, brilliant labor market that, there's more than September Disabilities Month. It should be every freaking day. It should just be easy. And I mean, we talk wage subsidies, but most employers will tell you that they are so fucking hard to get, or there's just too much paperwork. And I guess WorkBC is supposed to be your agent for change there, but employers aren't going to them.
We're learning so much about neurodiverse people, and their abilities are like superpowers. But what employers might see is somebody that, might be a little too quirky for the environment, or, was a little too fixated in one area. And you know how employers want everybody to be able to multitask and do 1,000 things right? That can be a challenge for a neurodiverse person, right? I think there needs to be more education and awareness around how to work with diverse working styles and different approaches to getting work done.
It shouldn't be so hard to get things when you're Indigenous. It shouldn't. Like for us, we wanted to get our status cards, which takes forever. So we can't do anything because we're not status. Like, why is it so difficult?
From Free Rein Associates and Life Strategies, this is the Diversity Disconnect podcast. I'm Mallory Tomlinson. Episode 3, Walking Through Spiderwebs, the Discomfort of Change. How often did the phrase, "you don't know what you don't know," come up in data analysis discussions?
A lot. We sounded like a broken record, all of us. Like it was a lot.
Some people would say it explicitly, and then it would kind of carry through into other conversations, and the theme would be you don't know what you don't know. People would say that they're struggling with knowing how to help people, or even what services are available in terms of access, making things accessible. And it's like, you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah, I almost feel like it came up as like a joke at first of like not necessarily a joke, but like, like it was kind of just silly of like, you don't know what you don't know. And then we're like, oh, like that's actually the case. Like,
it's really real.
It takes on that serious matter where all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You don't know what you don't know. No matter who you are, there are and will always be gaps in your knowledge, areas where you have little to no experience. Despite how universal of a human experience this is, recognizing one's own ignorance is an uncomfortable feeling for most. Very often, we are afraid to say, "I don't know." When it comes to diversity and inclusion, we all have areas for learning and growth.
I mean, everyone wants to do their best, right? But nobody really knows what a person needs. Like, if you know one person with a visual impairment, you know one person. Do they use a cane? Maybe, but maybe not. I have lupus. My headaches are going to look a lot different than your headaches. We're not all the same. We're not the same person. We all have different needs, and we have that intersectionality of our lives, the past and the present, and what our hopes are for the future. And yet there's this instant, oh, you have a migraine? Okay, well, you're just going to need this, this, and this. No, I don't. Or you're Indigenous, so you're going to need this, this, and this. If you know one Indigenous person, you know one Indigenous person. Like, that's it.
If you don't belong to an underrepresented group, such as Indigenous peoples or peoples experiencing a disabling condition, it can be hard to know the challenges and barriers they face.
In terms of awareness, individuals spoke a lot towards the lack of understanding. Employers often lacked awareness about what it means to even get into work or to be able to bring your full self to work, right? And workplaces, I think, also expressed some lack of awareness of job seekers or people who are working with them in terms of the realities of working within a particular workspace. Like, what does it mean to actually be typing all day, right? Is that manageable? What does it mean to be front-facing, serving coffees all day? And so individuals lacked awareness about what the realities were in a workplace, and workplaces lacked understanding about what it meant to live in a world where not everybody looks like you, a world that wasn't necessarily built to see you even just exist, a world that isn't built to see you necessarily thrive.
For people experiencing disabling conditions, a lack of awareness in rural communities create unrecognized barriers to inclusion.
There's really no understanding of what people with diverse abilities need and how they can be involved in our community. We don't really provide opportunities for people. Just getting out in the community is difficult. On days I might need to use a cane, Madeleine, have you tried to use the sidewalk? So much fun, right? I get bad migraines, and there have been a few times when I've had to call and say, I'm sorry, I can't come in. I have a migraine and I am stuck in bed. And my old boss would say, oh, just take a Tylenol and come to work. That's not how it works. I woke up on Canada Day and my fingers were swollen and my wrists were swollen. I was in so much pain. And she said, oh, just suck it up. We're busy. We need you to come in. Take Tylenol if you need. And I went to work, and by the end of my break, I had taken 2 Tylenol extra strength. I was fired because she said I wasn't reliable. And in 2020, I finally got diagnosed with lupus. It's frustrating because people think my pain is something I can just easily brush off or I'm exaggerating. But I'm not. It's really hard to get out of bed some days. And now I've been unemployed for months. I've gone through all my savings, everything. So right now I'm at the point where I need a job. I need to find something. But what can I get now, right? I can't work in a restaurant because I can't be on my feet for long. I can't. I looked into doing they're looking for people at hotels and stuff, and I can't do it because when you're at the desk, you're on your feet. I already asked, and they won't let me use a stool. All my past experience is labor work, so office jobs aren't really looking at my resume. But people don't seem to understand that it's not that I don't want to do it. It's not that I don't want to work. It's that I can't. I physically cannot do it.
And as Alex points out, rural communities can create environments where it's easier for those experiencing barriers or marginalization to go unseen.
Sometimes people out in the rural communities, they have homelessness for sure, but I find that it's easier to find a place, even if it is in a bush. You know what I'm saying? At least you have a tiny little place. It's private, it's to yourself. Whereas in the city, you're on the sidewalk and you're in front of everybody. You don't have that place, right? So I think that the population's need is more visible. Whereas people in the rural communities are in tiny little homes here or there, or hidden encampments in the bush, and they're not reaching out saying, help me, help me. So I think that the awareness is not there.
This lack of awareness often leaves folks experiencing disabling conditions with a difficult question: to disclose to your employer or not?
It's up to us as employees to let the employer know about our disability because they're not allowed to ask these questions. So making it known that we have these issues helps. But at the same time, we're kind of told not to tell everybody. And you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you don't tell anybody. But there's also the fear that telling someone could end up costing you the job, and it's catch-22.
For Indigenous peoples, when an awareness of Canada's history of colonization is missing, or when cultural practices aren't recognized with respect, it can prevent people from feeling like they belong.
Yeah. The Kamloops discovery, the 215 unmarked graves at the residential school there, is mind-boggling to me that people didn't know that was happening. But I grew up with it, right? My aunt went to that school, so I didn't understand that people didn't know that residential schools were a thing and that kids never came home from those things. I went to my dad and I'm like, how did people not know? And he's like, they were never taught it. I think the first conversation I ever had with my dad, it was grade 1. It was ingrained in us. This is what happened. And when you don't know those traumas exist and you have old unconscious beliefs about Indigenous people, what I've seen is that so much of that is that unconscious set of beliefs that are guiding their behaviors is really kind of a dangerous weapon.
A lack of awareness became an unexpected challenge for our researchers in the early days of data collection, particularly when talking to folks outside of Indigenous communities.
Yeah, this one's a tough one for us to talk about, I think, just because it was shocking. The most that we noticed was that people just didn't want to talk about it. They would try to like skirt around it or have like excuses almost of like, oh, well, they don't have problems because they're Indigenous. Like, that's just their own deal, you know? Like, it is what it is kind of their mindset. And I don't know, it was such an interesting phenomenon.
As researchers, we wanted to be impartial and let our participants say what they were going to say and try to not lead them too much, because we've been told through this whole thing there's data in nothing. So
no data is data.
no
Exactly.
data is data. So not necessarily leading them, we gave them the information of what this project is looking at specifically and followed our interview guides and the framework, but didn't want to lead too much. But once we noticed that people were not bringing it up in any context without prompting, we're like, okay, maybe we'll like try to broach the subject a little bit, being mindful. But we would say, I remember like one of the first times that I directly asked, so what about Indigenous folks? Like, what have you noticed that they're encountering? Got told, well, there are people that we serve who are Indigenous, but their issues have nothing to do with the fact that they're Indigenous or that they have status. And so that was like, for me, it felt like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have asked that. Like,
Did they give you any indication of what they thought the issues were?
No, it was again that kind of like trying to just skirt past it. And it was really interesting to me because like this individual was like, she was fairly high up in like the community as a service provider. And like, I was not expecting that at all. Like, she seemed very well informed, very like educated on the like community kind of aspects and landscape. And then to all of a sudden hear that, like, I stopped taking my notes and was like, okay, like that's where we're at. And like, I don't know, like I know rural communities are farther behind than urban centers, but when these communities are very, very often surrounded by Indigenous reserves and things like that, like you would think that it would be a lot more tied in with the community. And I don't know, I think it was also just frustrating to go forward knowing that like in my community, it was something that like we grew up with. Like in our school, it was very big part, like having that Indigenous culture, having all these students from the different reserves come in, and then going to these communities where there's like no sense of even accountability of like, hey, these people even exist here. Like there was only really one community where the one person we spoke with was like, yeah, like if we didn't have Indigenous people, like our community was shut down because they're the ones who are like powering the resources, the community. Yeah, exactly. Right. And like, they're the workers in the community. Every other one, like it was so hard to even just see like visibly Indigenous people. And I know that's not like accounting for all of them, but like, it just seemed like they were very shunned out. And that's the vibe we got too, just from speaking with people. It was, I don't know, frustrating, fascinating, so many questions.
Knowing of the challenges and barriers in finding and maintaining employment for underrepresented groups isn't the only step in changing them. Once you know a problem exists, you need to know what to do next.
As the employer, too often we don't know much about those with disabilities. I think we need to know about these groups, like where they need support and what their strengths are. How can we empower them? What are our obligations as their employer?
As the service provider, connecting with the employers, there's a lot of misunderstanding. Everything from your PMP, accessibility requirements, they really don't understand sometimes what they don't know they're scared of. It's important to me that, people know about us, and we are accessing everybody that we can in the province because we are a provincially and federally funded organization. So we should be there to help. But as hard as we try, a lot of people don't seem to know about us or how we can help them. I think success for me is at least when there's awareness of, of the services that are available, and that we're here to help with what they don't know. You don't have to be scared to say, I don't know. Again, a lot of people are scared to say, I don't know, and ask for help. Sometimes I have people who are scared about how to talk to individuals with disabilities, which is just ridiculous. But whatever. So employers call me, and then I come in, or I bring the staff, and they train us to train the client for them. I wish they were more willing to learn with us too, but they seem to be too afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. My biggest thing is convincing people to think outside the box, to hire people with a disability, and that it's okay. It's not a scary thing to do.
For employers, right? I think when we're walking around the world, like doing whatever we're doing, people being unaware of anyone's context, it makes us vulnerable to be re-traumatized over and over. And for the people who are not aware of those contexts and needs, they become aggressive without knowing they are hurting. And I think that's what it's really, really beautiful that we are at a time in history, at least in Canada, where we're bringing up this trauma-informed approach. And sometimes, going back to the script, it becomes a script, and we need to be very careful about that. I think it's having a space for trauma-informed practices. It really means to care about who's standing in front of you and being almost creative about how to relate with them. And when I say creative, I mean not having a script. For good or for bad, like allowing for that person to enter your space little by little, and you being careful and understanding that it takes time for someone to emerge or to come closer to you or to give you information, and then being curious. So if you have those pieces, when you're curious and you know there's stories behind it, and they come from a story, maybe you can even ask, like, what's your story? Just that. I do that a lot in the SkyTrain, or I do that.
If you ask George what it is that makes his employees stay, he'll tell you it all comes down to respect.
What you put in is what you get. So you treat employees well. They will take care of your place. Give them bonuses, show them that they're appreciated. Don't push them over the limit. Either tell them it's a good job, or give them a bonus or a gas card or something. When you take care of your team, even if they get offered, $2 more somewhere else, it's not about the money at that point. They'll stay with you. Most workers really stay with us long, just from the fact that they feel respected. That appreciation and just treating them well, that's the main thing, because you've got to remember, you can't do any job with just you.
Well, for individuals in our research, they spoke so much to the importance of feeling valued and respected within their workforce. It was affirming, life-changing. Like, they may not have had a lot of spaces or opportunities or experiences where they've truly felt valued or respected in the workforce or in their life or other contexts. And so it was so important to the success of individuals, knowing that someone would work in partnership with them, provide them an opportunity, not look down upon them for whatever failings they might feel that they have. Respect was so incredibly important and is a gift that an employer can give someone in their community. And that respect, breeds engagement. It breeds productivity. It breeds motivation. respect is the core. We all want to be respected. And employers are rigid because they want to be respected in their process, and they've invested money into their business, and they've mortgaged their house or done all sorts of things to like make this happen, and they want employees to respect them too. They can give that back to individuals as well. They can open up some space, loosen up the reins a little bit, and let people explore and figure out sort of different ways to grapple common issues. And that's what respect means. It's respectful to give everyone an opportunity. It's respectful to not judge someone based on some box that's ticked off of a diversity survey. If you can offer individuals respect, they're going to stay with you. Those individuals spoke highly of the employers that they worked with, whether or not they were currently employed with them or not. When individuals felt respected in their environment, they reported, good experiences with employers. And that's good business. When we talk about word of mouth in small communities, that's what we're talking about.
Respect goes beyond an employer and employee relationship, though. How we view and respect underrepresented groups as a society ultimately impacts our interpersonal interactions as well.
Indigenous people are, from my perspective, and what the government showcases. I think the Indigenous folks are looked at as the lowest rung on the totem pole. They've been treated negatively and terrible. I can't even put the words into my mouth, but for years and years and years. So if they can't provide clean water, why would they provide any other resource? They can't provide just the regular daily basics, the essentials. Then why would they do that? Why should anybody else care then? I think something else that pops up for me is like having an employer be like culturally sensitive to Indigenous culture. Just things like taking a few days off for a funeral. It's usually 4 days with protocol, and I need an employer who can understand that and be flexible to that. I think that was always a factor for, me staying at the job or not. It helps me or anyone that's Indigenous or another culture feel more a part of the company, not judged or stereotyped of anything. I think it would make work much easier as well. So I'm not like on edge or eggshells or worried about saying things or just bullying in general.
For Jordan, feeling respected as an employee plays an even greater role in rural regions.
In a small community, that's what people look for, right? They're looking for jobs where they're going to have benefits, where they're going to be well taken care of and treated respectfully. Yeah. They want to be respected and they want to be valued. When there aren't a lot of options in town, you look more for how you're treated. When I feel respected, I feel like I can succeed. When employers are willing to invest in me and help me and respect, like if I say like, look, this way doesn't really work for me, but I can do it this way, then yeah, that's been huge.
Respect is a two-way street. And when it's present throughout the employment process, from recruitment and interview to onboarding right through to employment transitions, it creates spaces where people are treated with dignity, autonomy is valued, and personal growth is supported for everyone in the workplace.
When I started at this one place, the whole company had diversity training, and basically all it taught them was what not to say. The body language was still there, and there were still the slips every now and then, and the aggressiveness, passive aggressiveness, that kind of stuff.
When people are hired, they want to come to work in an inclusive environment, free of bias and prejudice. They want a welcoming place where people want to come to work.
I would, on a daily basis, have somebody say to me, like the exact words, actually, are you serious? They had to go to the bottom of the barrel to hire somebody like you? Is there nobody in this town that wants to work? Of course, I'd be like, wow, are you serious? You had to go to the bottom of the barrel to get a customer like you? Was there no one else that needed their lawn done today? I didn't care, right? But yeah, constant.
Racism, ableism, and discrimination remain an unacceptable daily reality for too many Canadians. Workplaces are not immune to this.
I have been through every store I can think of, and they won't hire me. Nope. They would not hire me because of my disability. Having a disability, it's harder to find jobs. People judge us. I've known sometimes within 2 minutes of an interview that I didn't get the job. The interviewer made up a bias. They don't even really give me a chance. And it's not easy. As soon as you disclose that you have a disability, that person puts their guard up, and all that goes through their mind is, if I'm going to pay you, then why not pay someone that can do the job without assistance, kind of thing.
Racism, no matter where you go. They gave me every dirty job they could think of. They'd give me the jobs I'd have to travel furthest to, even if another guy was closer. And once, my girlfriend at the time was taking a cooking course nearby. So after about a week, I told one of the guys that I'm working with, you know, it's kind of fun because my girlfriend's just over here, a couple of blocks away, so I'm actually closer now than what I was before. And it got back to the management. And once they found out, they just put me back out into another town. When one of my friends was going to get a job at the clothing store, she was First Nations. She went there, and you know what they did? They sat them in the spot and said to her, you watch every First Nations that comes in the door, and then they say the older you get as a First Nation is the worse that they treat you. And it's true.
Well, our individuals for sure said that they experienced discrimination in the workforce. Employers weren't as readily able to express that, you know, they discriminate, but we certainly had at least one employer, you know, say we don't hire folks from that particular group. And maybe that's because they've had poor experiences, but I would invite them to, you know, look a little broader and dig a little deeper in terms of what it really was that made that a poor work experience. Was it the individual's interpersonal skills, their ability to do the job, or was it the environment that they walked into?
Experiences of discrimination can impact a person's career long after the incident takes place. Research participants reported discrimination leaves them feeling undervalued, unworthy, and left behind.
I once had a client who had been trying to get work at the hospital for a long time. He only recently self-identified as Indigenous on his application because there's a lot of hesitation when it comes to doing that. Whether or not they'll be discriminated based on that, etc., etc. Then he wonders if he only got the interview because of that. That doesn't leave him feeling very good either.
No one wants to be treated differently just because they have a disability or because they're Indigenous. And no one wants to be erased from their communities either.
We have a long history of being part of this community, but we've been in the shadows and erased.
So in terms of preventing discrimination in their workplaces, employers need to take a critical, honest look at their policies, procedures, the systems that are in place. And if they're going to commit to making inclusion and diversity a pillar of their business, they need to dedicate resources, time, energy. If you're going to onboard people who look different, who work differently, you're probably going to want to engage in some level of training for your existing workforce.
Ignorance causes harm. It's actively harmful. And you can say you don't know what you don't know. And if you haven't had the opportunity to know or learn up until this point, that's okay. But not even that it's okay, but it is what it is. But at this point, there is no excuse for ignorance. You can be ignorant up to a point, and then you are told that there's a problem here, and then that is your opportunity to learn and do some reflection, engagement. After that point, there's no excuse anymore, and it's just it's ignorance, and it's harmful. It's choosing what is easy and what's comfortable, and when we're comfortable, we're not growing, and we're not improving the circumstances in which we live. So you can say that you're not actively causing harm or you're not trying to harm somebody, but there's overt harm and then there's covert harm, and choosing not to be aware when you have the opportunity is causing harm in a covert way.
Discrimination, marginalization, oppression, these aren't new experiences for people with disabling conditions or Indigenous peoples. They aren't new factors in employment. Governments, nonprofits, service agencies, and others have been working to implement resources and supports to address these very issues. But according to research participants, these supports have barriers to access that can feel like they create more challenges than they solve.
In general, I have a lot of trouble navigating all the BC government's the web pages and stuff, looking for employment and resources in general. I know I've looked on there before, and I get very overwhelmed. I feel like I have to click 100 links just to find something. And then when I do find something, I'm like, okay, the requirements are so strict that I would never qualify for anything like that. When I tried to apply for income assistance, and they were like, well, do you have any disabilities? And I said, yes, I have bipolar disorder and lupus. And she's like, oh, you can still work through those. Sorry, what did you just say? That's actually what she told me, but everyone suffers differently, right? And then we have Work BC, but there are certain criteria you have to meet for everything. There's just so many obstacles to get through it. And you know what? Honestly, sometimes what I think happens, or what can happen, is you end up second guessing yourself and you start doubting whether you actually do have a disability. Because why is it so difficult for you to jump through these hoops and get some form of compensation, whatever it might look like? And then, as a matter of fact, if it is a mental health thing, then you can just very easily say, you know what? Yeah, I'll be fine, right? And so self-doubt in that is a huge role.
Our individuals spoke to bureaucracy a lot because they were often in this space where, they've got these rules, these restrictions, these reporting requirements for all sorts of different people. Like they're working maybe with medical teams, maybe they're working with government agencies or government funding, like disability services. And they're often having to indicate that they are disabled over and over and over again, right? And I think that happens too with Indigenous people. Like if you're trying to indicate that you have status, right? It can take a little bit of time for that process to go through, and it's complex and it's time consuming, it's aggravating, it's convoluted, and none of those processes are really set up with the user in mind, right? Like those processes are set up for government in mind, and they're intended to ensure that, funding or whatever it is gets to the people who need it. But those systems are often counteracting each other. They take so much time and energy and effort. Like it's a full-time job, right? Doing reporting. And it's not just the individuals, it's the community service providers as well. They're having huge reporting burdens for wage subsidy programs, which are intended to provide funding for employers to hire from these kinds of groups. But when the process is so complex or time-consuming, it's almost not worth the trouble. And I think that happens across the board for service providers, for workplaces, and for individuals.
And for many Indigenous peoples, the bureaucracies present in their workplaces clashed with their cultures and values.
One person we spoke with worked for their region's health authority, and you could tell they love healthcare and the positive impact it has on people. But that love and passion doesn't make the cultural differences any easier. They told us, I find it quite hard to leave, but in terms of the system, we are not the right fit for Indigenous candidates. A union is not a good fit. It's just too cold, It's like there's no relation. It just doesn't relate to our culture whatsoever. That stuck with me.
And in some communities, the reality is that there just aren't enough people available to help navigate the system.
We need more support, more people. I'm covering 3 regions alone. We need more funding. We don't get paid competitively. And I understand my organization's been working on that, and they're helping. They're trying their very best, but because everything's on contract, there's a separation between who's doing the work and who's funding it. They need to understand this is not an easy job. The amount of work I've had on my shoulders, it's too much. It's stressful. When I'm stressed, I think I cannot be as creative as I want to be. Like right now, I have so much paperwork pending that I don't know when I'll be able to complete it. A bunch of admin work, and it's taking away from my ability to help my clients.
Where I'm from, they need more people within the departments themselves because there's so many departments, but there's only going to be 1 or 2 within the department, like social assistance, education, and employment, etc. They just need more people. And even then, employees need proper training on how to actually provide their services to us because it's like my niece. She's trying to get some help, some assistance for schooling, and one person will tell her, you got to go to the band office. And they'll just say, oh, you got to go over there. And she still doesn't know where to go. I had to call a council to get more information, and we still don't know if her school is sorted. But she's going, and she's just hoping they will hand over her degree at the end.
And not knowing where to get help was also a theme for employers too.
When I went to the district office and started asking about stuff, I thought maybe they'd know and be able to help. Well, the front desk person doesn't know anything. Like with the bathroom and renovating it to be more accessible, I was asking them if there was funding for the bathroom, like if there was anything out there. And I was pretty much told there was no funding like that. They didn't have access to it through the district. And then there was no information given. So if it's mandatory, why isn't there something like, here's a website with information to have something? Because what do you look under? Maybe those at the front desk of their city halls need more training on resources in their community and in what's going on. They need a little more knowledge because asking about these things, I came into a wall after a wall after a wall.
But when employers do reach out to service providers like Alex for support, the paperwork involved often becomes a problem.
There's such amazing opportunities through WorkBC, like the wage subsidy program. The government really is trying to provide opportunities. But there's this delicate balance between accountability of government, stewardship of the taxpayers' money, and development of systems. And so, employers like the sound of a wage subsidy. But with the wage subsidy, you've got to develop a training plan. And there's paperwork and reporting involved, right? Systems tend to be complex in the eyes of the employer. They don't want a bunch of paperwork. They don't want to have to do a bunch of reporting. They want timely repayment. I fully understand stewardship, I do, but there's this silk thread of a line between too bureaucratic and not free enough to allow the relationships to be unencumbered with a lot of other policies and procedures. There's a line. There's a balance, and I'm not sure we've hit it.
And sometimes supporting the needs of everyday small businesses doesn't feel like a top priority for people who have the power to create change and fund supports.
I think that the message kind of has gotten muddled over time, and small business isn't necessarily the sexiest topic for them to want to deal with, right? And this isn't a diss on our minister at all. It's just that her new role now is, she has small business and economic development, but she also has innovation and those more exciting things. So my wish would be that maybe we divide and just have our own ministry for small business and economic development or something like that, and just focus on that issue. It's a big issue with diverse needs across the province. Investment in innovation and technology has been a bigger focus, but in rural communities, we still have some foundational challenges we need addressed. And I keep thinking that we're doing this really big, really great, really important thing, but we're missing out on some of the fundamentals in some places still. And without those, these fancy, innovative projects aren't really doing much for us.
Navigating new roads and facing what we don't know, no matter who we are, often comes with a feeling of discomfort. Putting ourselves outside of our comfort zones to improve our knowledge, changing old behaviors or ways of doing things to build more inclusive spaces, encountering difficult systems and bureaucracies when seeking solutions. These things aren't always easy things to do.
Spiderwebs, are things that aren't necessarily as visible to us. And I think about like early mornings when I like go out and I leave and you get one kind of in your hair and you know you've disturbed some sort of space or you're being held back by this spider web and your initial result is just swat at it, right? And so I think that's kind of like bureaucracy. We sort of swat at it or we dodge around it to avoid it if we can see it. But the physical experience of having that spider web, like, you know that you've swatted it away, but you still feel it, right? And it's there. And I think that's the experience when people bump into the bureaucracy of it all. In terms of employment, it's if you saw it or you hit it or you managed to dodge it, but now you're left with this lasting feeling that it's still there and you don't want it there. And it just won't go away.
But this discomfort needs to be faced if we are to begin to bridge the disconnects between employers and underrepresented groups. All of us need to recognize there are areas where we lack knowledge and understanding, and then make intentional efforts to listen, learn, and reflect on how we can work to increase our awareness, build respect, and prevent this discrimination. What steps will you take to begin to learn what you don't know?
I live, work, and play on the traditional unceded land of the Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, Katzie, and Matsqui nations. And one of the things that is unique about the space where I come from is the cross-section of nations. And we really have been focusing in this research on storytelling. And I'll just share a quick story about an elder who was talking to us at a cultural day out in Fort Langley. And she was sharing how these nations collaborated with each other and often would have to be sharing messages across their traditional lands, going from one place to another, sharing stories. And I feel a little bit like I'm going from one place to another, sharing stories with this particular project. And so if we can be ready to hear and receive the stories that we are focusing on with this project, that would be my ask of everyone.
Diversity Disconnect is funded by the Government of Canada. To learn more about the research, visit freereignAssociates.ca/diversity-disconnect or check out the links in our show notes. The Diversity Disconnect podcast is hosted by Mallory Tomlinson and produced by Megan Boekhorst. Our audio engineer is Tim McAlpine. Guests include Desiree Carlson, Cassie Taylor, Madeleine Warkentin, and Emily White. This episode featured Megan Boekhorst as Jordan, Diana King as Shane, Peter Bailey as George, and Harmony Toth as Alex. The Diversity Disconnect podcast was developed by Free Reign Associates and Life Strategies.